Captain Sarah Mitchell adjusted her headset as Flight 447 cruised smoothly at 35,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. The Boeing 777 carried 238 passengers from Los Angeles to Tokyo, and everything appeared routine on this Tuesday evening flight. Sarah had been flying commercial aircraft for 12 years, but her colleagues knew very little about her background before joining the airline. The cockpit was quiet except for the gentle hum of engines and occasional radio chatter from air traffic control. First Officer David Chun sat beside her, reviewing weather reports for their approach to Narita Airport, still 6 hours away. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, but her mind occasionally drifted to memories she rarely shared with anyone. Few people knew that before becoming a commercial pilot, Sarah had served 8 years as a Navy SEAL pilot, one of only 12 women ever to complete the grueling training program. She had flown countless missions over hostile territory, earned 3 distinguished flying crosses, and received the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism during a rescue operation in Afghanistan. The airline hired her based on her exceptional flying record, but her military background remained largely unknown to her civilian colleagues. The passenger cabin behind them was settling into the long flight routine. Business travelers worked on laptops while families with children tried to get comfortable for the overnight journey. Flight attendants moved efficiently through the aisles, serving dinner and ensuring passenger comfort. Everything seemed perfectly normal until Sarah noticed something unusual on her peripheral vision display. "David, are you seeing this anomaly in the cargo hold temperature readings?" she asked, pointing to a slight fluctuation on her screen. Before David could respond, the cockpit door burst open despite being locked and reinforced according to Post 9/11 security protocols. 3 men rushed into the confined space, and Sarah immediately recognized the coordinated way they moved. These were not ordinary criminals. The leader, a tall man with cold eyes and a slight accent, pointed a weapon at David while his companions took positions blocking any escape route. "Take a seat or be killed," he shouted, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Sarah's training kicked in instantly, though she showed no outward sign of her military background. Her heart rate remained steady, and her hands stayed relaxed on the controls. She had faced far more dangerous situations during her SEAL operations, but this presented unique challenges since she had to protect innocent passengers. "What do you want?" Sarah asked calmly, her voice showing just enough concern to seem like a frightened civilian pilot. "You will change course immediately," the leader commanded. "We have control of this aircraft now. Any resistance will result in passenger deaths." David's hands trembled as he looked between Sarah and the hijackers. He had never experienced anything like this during his 15 years of flying. The young first officer appeared ready to panic, which could complicate Sarah's assessment of the situation. "Where do you want us to go?" Sarah asked, already calculating fuel requirements and possible destinations while appearing compliant. "That information will be provided when necessary," the leader replied. "First, you will contact your company and inform them this aircraft is now under our control. You will read exactly the statement I provide." One of the other hijackers handed Sarah a piece of paper with typed instructions. She scanned the contents quickly, noting the demands for prisoner releases and political concessions that suggested this was a terrorist operation rather than a simple hijacking for money. Sarah keyed her radio to the company frequency, but instead of reading the prepared statement, she transmitted a coded message that only certain personnel would understand. "Los Angeles operations, this is Flight 447. We are experiencing some unusual passenger behavior and request priority handling for our arrival procedures." The phrase "unusual passenger behavior" was airline code for hijacking, while priority handling indicated the crew was still in control and able to resist. Sarah hoped the dispatcher would recognize the hidden meaning and alert authorities without alarming the hijackers. The leader studied her suspiciously. "That was not the message I gave you. I had to use proper radio procedures," Sarah explained smoothly. "If I suddenly change my normal communication style, air traffic control will become suspicious and might scramble fighter jets. That would only make your situation more difficult." Her explanation seemed to satisfy the leader, who nodded grudgingly. Sarah realized these men had planned extensively, but, lacked detailed knowledge of aviation procedures, which gave her a significant advantage. Now you will turn this aircraft toward the coordinates I provide, the leader continued, handing her another paper with latitude and longitude numbers. Sarah examined the numbers and quickly calculated they would take the aircraft toward a remote area of the Pacific Ocean, far from any normal commercial routes. This destination concerned her because it suggested the hijackers planned to either crash the plane or transfer passengers to another location. Those coordinates will require additional fuel, Sarah said. We'll need to reduce altitude and adjust our speed to reach that location. Then, do it, the leader snapped. Sarah began making the course adjustments while her mind raced through possible response strategies. She had extensive experience in hostage rescue operations and understood the psychology of terrorist groups. These men appeared highly trained and disciplined, but they had made the critical error of assuming she was just an ordinary airline pilot. The aircraft's autopilot system allowed Sarah to implement course changes gradually while she assessed her options. She could overpower the hijackers physically, but that would likely result in passenger casualties if their colleagues in the cabin became violent. She needed more information about their numbers and weapons before taking direct action. How many of your people are aboard this flight? Sarah asked, making the question sound like a concerned pilot worried about passenger safety. Enough to ensure compliance, the leader replied vaguely. David caught Sarah's eye and mouthed the word help, but she gave him a barely perceptible shake of her head, warning him to remain passive. The young first officer lacked the training to assist in this situation, and any amateur heroics could get people killed. Sarah activated the aircraft's emergency transponder code while appearing to adjust routine navigation settings. This would alert air traffic control that Flight 447 was in distress without requiring radio communication that might alarm the hijackers. The course change is complete, Sarah announced. We're now heading toward your requested coordinates. The leader examined her flight display suspiciously, but the instruments showed exactly what he expected to see. Sarah had learned to manipulate enemy surveillance during her military service, and these basic deception tactics came naturally to her. Excellent, the leader said. Now we wait. Wait for what? David asked nervously. That is not your concern, the hijacker replied coldly. Sarah used the next hour to observe her captors carefully, noting their weapons, body language, and communication patterns. The leader appeared to be Middle Eastern, possibly Syrian or Lebanese based on his accent. The other two men seemed to be following orders without question, suggesting a military or paramilitary background. More importantly, Sarah noticed that none of them seemed comfortable in the aircraft environment. They gripped handholds during minor turbulence and appeared unfamiliar with aviation equipment. This suggested they had trained for this mission but lacked extensive flight experience. The leader's radio crackled with a brief transmission in Arabic, which Sarah understood perfectly thanks to her military language training. The message indicated that other hijackers in the passenger cabin had secured their objectives and were ready for the next phase of operations. Sarah realized this was a carefully planned terrorist attack, possibly involving multiple aircraft or coordinated ground operations. The remote Pacific destination suggested they intended to use Flight 447 as a weapon or bargaining chip rather than simply escaping with hostages. I need to check our fuel consumption, Sarah said, reaching for her flight management computer. No unnecessary actions, the leader warned. If we run out of fuel, everyone dies, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. Unless you know how to fly this aircraft yourself, you need me to monitor our systems. The leader hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Sarah used this opportunity to access the aircraft's communication systems and send a discrete data transmission to airline headquarters. The message appeared to be routine maintenance information, but it actually contained encoded intelligence about the hijackers' numbers, weapons, and apparent objectives. Meanwhile, David sat frozen in his seat, clearly overwhelmed by the situation. Sarah felt sympathy for her colleague, but knew she had to maintain her cover as an ordinary pilot while planning her response to this crisis. The hijacker's radio crackled again, and Sarah caught fragments of conversation about timing and coordination. Whatever they planned to do with Flight 447, it was part of a larger operation scheduled to occur at a specific time. We will be making another course change soon, the leader announced. Where to? Sarah asked. You will be informed when necessary. Sarah nodded compliantly while her mind raced through tactical possibilities. She had successfully infiltrated terrorist cells during her SEAL operations and understood how these groups operated. The key was to appear cooperative while gathering intelligence and waiting for the right moment to strike. The passengers remained unaware of the full situation, though Sarah could hear occasional disturbances from the cabin that suggested the hijackers were maintaining control through intimidation rather than violence. This gave her hope that casualties could be minimized if she chose the right moment to act. As Flight 447 continued toward its mysterious destination, Sarah prepared mentally for what might become the most challenging mission of her military and civilian career. The hijackers had chosen the wrong aircraft and definitely the wrong pilot for their operation. Her years of Navy SEAL training had taught her to remain calm under extreme pressure, assess enemy capabilities accurately, and strike decisively when the moment was right. These terrorists were about to discover that their carefully planned operation had encountered an unexpected obstacle. The night was still young, and Sarah knew the real confrontation was yet to come. 2 hours after the hijacking began, Sarah maintained her careful balance between compliance and subtle resistance. The aircraft flew steadily toward the coordinates provided by the terrorists, but she had managed to reduce their speed slightly without detection, buying time for ground authorities to respond. The leader of the hijackers paced nervously in the small cockpit space, frequently checking his watch and radio. Sarah recognized the signs of operational stress and knew that nervous terrorists made dangerous decisions. She needed to keep him calm while gathering more information about their plans. Sir, I'm concerned about our fuel situation, Sarah said in a respectful tone. At our current heading, we'll reach your coordinates with minimal reserves. If you need us to go anywhere else afterward, we'll need to land for refueling. The leader studied her flight management display suspiciously. How much fuel do we have? About 4 hours at current consumption, Sarah replied truthfully. But aviation regulations require us to maintain emergency reserves. We will not need 4 hours, the leader said, revealing more than he intended. Sarah filed this information away while continuing to monitor the aircraft systems. The fact that they wouldn't need 4 hours suggested either a relatively close final destination or that the hijackers didn't plan for the aircraft to land anywhere. Neither possibility was encouraging. David had remained silent for the past hour, but Sarah could see he was gathering courage to speak. She hoped he wouldn't do anything foolish that might provoke violence. What happens to the passengers? David asked quietly. That depends on whether certain demands are met, the leader replied coldly. Sarah recognized this as a standard terrorist negotiation tactic. The hijackers would make impossible demands that governments couldn't meet, giving them justification for whatever violent action they planned to take. She had seen this pattern during her military counterterrorism operations. The leader's radio crackled with another Arabic transmission. This time Sarah caught more details about timing and coordination with other terrorist cells. The conversation mentioned airports in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle, suggesting this was part of a coordinated attack on the West Coast. Copy that. The leader responded in English for her benefit. Flight 447 is on schedule. Sarah realized that her aircraft was just one piece of a larger terrorist operation. The knowledge that other innocent people were in danger strengthened her resolve to stop these hijackers. But she had to choose her moment carefully to avoid making the situation worse. I need to contact air traffic control about our route deviation, Sarah said. They'll become suspicious if we don't provide regular position reports. The leader considered this, then handed her another prepared statement. Read this exactly as written. Sarah examined the paper, which contained a plausible explanation for their course change involving weather avoidance and mechanical issues. However, she noticed that the statement included several phrases that would alert trained aviation professionals to their actual situation. She keyed her radio and transmitted the message with subtle modifications that maintained its surface meaning while adding coded warnings. Los Angeles Center, Flight 447 requesting clearance to deviate south due to unexpected turbulence. We're experiencing some minor system irregularities that require extended monitoring. The phrase, unexpected turbulence, was code for hostile action, while system irregularities requiring extended monitoring indicated ongoing threats that prevented normal operations. Roger Flight 447. Came the response from Air Traffic Control. Cleared as requested. Contact us on frequency 124.7 for further routing. Sarah noted the unusual frequency assignment, which was typically used for emergency communications. This confirmed that ground authorities had received her coded messages and were preparing their response. Why did they change our frequency? The leader asked suspiciously. Different controllers handled different airspace sectors, Sarah explained smoothly. As we deviate from normal routes, we need to work with controllers who manage the area we're entering. Her explanation satisfied the hijacker, but Sarah knew that the frequency change meant military interceptor aircraft were probably already airborne and tracking Flight 447. She had to be careful not to provoke a shoot-down order by making the aircraft appear too threatening. The leader received another radio transmission, this one longer and more detailed. Sarah caught references to target locations and synchronized timing that suggested the terrorists planned to use multiple hijacked aircraft as weapons, similar to the September 11th attacks. Change course to bearing 180, the leader commanded suddenly. Sarah checked her navigation display and realized this new heading would take them directly toward Los Angeles. Her blood ran cold as she understood the hijackers' true intention. They planned to crash Flight 447 into a target in the Los Angeles area, probably during morning rush hour when casualties would be maximized. That heading will take us back toward the coast, Sarah observed carefully. Execute the course change immediately, the leader snapped. Sarah complied while her mind raced through options. She could attempt to overpower the hijackers now, but they might have accomplices in the passenger cabin ready to kill innocent people in retaliation. She needed more information about their total numbers and capabilities. How long until we reach our final destination? David asked nervously. Approximately 1 hour, the leader replied. This confirmed Sarah's worst fears. 1 hour would put them over Los Angeles during morning rush hour, when millions of people would be starting their daily routines. The terrorists had planned this operation with devastating precision. Sarah activated her emergency transponder again, this time using the code for aircraft hijacked, combined with subtle navigation adjustments that would signal her military background to trained observers. She hoped that Air Force personnel monitoring the situation would recognize the tactical nature of her responses and understand that the pilot was not an ordinary civilian. I'm picking up radio chatter from other aircraft, David reported, listening to his headset. Sarah tuned in to the air traffic control frequency and heard several coded transmissions between controllers and military aircraft. Fighter jets were definitely airborne and positioning themselves around Flight 447, though they maintained enough distance to avoid visual contact. The leader's radio crackled with an urgent transmission in Arabic. Sarah caught words indicating that one of the other hijacked aircraft had encountered problems and might not reach its target. The speaker seemed agitated and was demanding updates on Flight 447 status. Tell them we are proceeding as planned, the leader transmitted back. Sarah realized this might be her only opportunity to prevent a massacre. If the other aircraft had failed, Flight 447 might be the terrorists' only remaining weapon. She had to act soon, but she needed to neutralize the hijackers without giving their accomplices in the passenger cabin time to harm innocent people. Sir, we're approaching controlled airspace around Los Angeles, Sarah said. I'll need to contact approach control soon. You will transmit only what I tell you to transmit, the leader warned. Of course, Sarah agreed. But they'll expect certain standard procedures. If I deviate too much from normal protocols, they'll know something is wrong. The leader considered this while studying the approaching coastline on the navigation display. Sarah could see him calculating distances and timing, confirming her suspicion that they planned to crash into a specific target at a predetermined time. She began preparing for her counterattack while maintaining her facade of compliance. Her SEAL training had included extensive hand-to-hand combat techniques designed for close-quarters situations exactly like this. The confined cockpit space actually worked to her advantage since it limited the hijackers' movement and ability to use their weapons effectively. Sarah noted the positions of all 3 terrorists and identified their weapons. The leader carried what appeared to be a pistol, while his companions had knives. She would need to neutralize the gun first, then deal with the others before they could escape to harm passengers. Approaching Los Angeles airspace now, Sarah announced, her voice calm and professional despite the adrenaline beginning to flow through her system. The leader moved closer to check her instruments, putting himself within striking distance. Sarah tensed her muscles subtly, preparing to move when the moment was right. Contact approach control, the leader commanded. Sarah reached for her radio, but instead of transmitting to air traffic control, she suddenly pivoted in her seat and struck the leader's gun hand with a precise blow that sent the weapon flying across the cockpit. Before the other hijackers could react, she delivered a stunning blow to the leader's throat that dropped him instantly. "David, get the gun," Sarah shouted as she grappled with the second hijacker. The first officer scrambled for the weapon, while Sarah used her superior training to quickly subdue her opponent. The third hijacker lunged at her with his knife, but she deflected the blade and delivered a devastating counterattack that left him unconscious on the cockpit floor. In less than 30 seconds, all three hijackers were neutralized. Sarah's years of combat training had prepared her for exactly this type of close-quarters engagement, and the terrorists had underestimated their target completely. "Are you hurt?" Sarah asked David, who sat clutching the hijacker's pistol with shaking hands. "I'm okay," he replied shakily. "But what about their people in the passenger cabin?" Sarah was already moving to address that concern. She activated the aircraft's public address system and spoke directly to the passengers in a calm, authoritative voice that carried the unmistakable tone of military command. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We have successfully regained control of the flight deck. However, there may still be hostile individuals in the passenger cabin. I need all able-bodied passengers to immediately identify and restrain anyone who appears threatening. Flight attendants, please coordinate passenger actions and report the situation to me immediately." The response was swift and decisive. Passengers who had been held in fear for hours erupted into action, quickly identifying and overwhelming the remaining hijackers who had been scattered throughout the cabin to maintain control. Within minutes, flight attendants reported that 4 additional terrorists had been captured and restrained by passengers. The aircraft was now completely secure, but Sarah knew their troubles were far from over. With the hijackers secured, Sarah immediately began damage control procedures while maintaining her cover as a civilian pilot. She couldn't reveal her military background without compromising ongoing counterterrorism operations, but she needed to communicate critical intelligence to authorities on the ground. "David, help me secure these prisoners," Sarah said, indicating the unconscious hijackers in the cockpit. "Use the restraints from the emergency equipment kit." While David tied up the terrorists with aircraft cable restraints, Sarah contacted air traffic control with an urgent transmission. She knew that military personnel would be monitoring this frequency and could relay information to appropriate intelligence agencies. "Los Angeles approach. This is Flight 447 declaring an emergency. We have regained control from hostile actors and are securing the aircraft. Be advised, this appears to be part of a coordinated operation involving multiple targets on the West Coast." The perpetrators were receiving radio communications in Arabic suggesting other aircraft may be involved. The response came immediately from a different controller, one whose voice carried the crisp efficiency of military training. "Flight 447, roger your emergency. Proceed direct to Los Angeles International Airport. Emergency services are standing by. Can you provide details about the threat assessment?" Sarah understood the coded question. The controller was asking for intelligence about the scope of the terrorist operation while maintaining the appearance of routine emergency procedures. "Affirmative. We observed coordinated communications suggesting synchronized attacks on major population centers during morning rush hour. Estimate 4 to 6 aircraft involved based on radio intercepts. Perpetrators mentioned airports in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle as operational bases. This information would allow authorities to check all aircraft that had departed from those airports and identify other potential threats." Sarah hoped it wasn't too late to prevent additional attacks. "Copy all information. Vector heading 090 for immediate approach. Descend and maintain flight level 100. Sarah began her descent while continuing to monitor emergency frequencies. She could hear military controllers coordinating with various aircraft, suggesting that her intelligence had triggered a massive response. Fighter jets were being vectored towards suspicious flights throughout the region. The flight attendants reported from the passenger cabin that all 7 hijackers were secured and that several passengers had sustained minor injuries during the struggle. However, no one required immediate medical attention, and the mood in the cabin had shifted from terror to grim determination. "Captain, this is Flight Attendant Martinez," came a voice over the intercom. "The passengers want to know what happens next. Some are asking if we're still in danger." Sarah considered her response carefully. She needed to maintain calm while preparing everyone for what could be a complicated landing situation. "Please inform the passengers that we have successfully secured the aircraft and are returning to Los Angeles. However, they should remain seated with seat belts fastened as we may encounter additional security procedures during our approach and landing." David monitored the radio communications while Sarah focused on flying the aircraft. The young first officer had recovered from his initial shock and was now functioning effectively as her co-pilot, though she could see he had questions about her combat abilities. "Sarah, how did you know how to fight like that?" David asked quietly. "That wasn't standard airline training. I had some self-defense instruction before joining the airline," Sarah replied vaguely. "Sometimes life experiences prepare you for unexpected situations." It wasn't exactly a lie, but it certainly didn't reveal the full truth about her Navy SEAL background. Sarah knew that maintaining operational security was crucial, especially since her military identity could be valuable in future counterterrorism operations. The leader of the hijackers began to regain consciousness, muttering in Arabic as he tested his restraints. Sarah understood every word as he cursed his failure and worried about the success of the other attacks. She gathered valuable intelligence about the terrorist network while appearing to ignore his ramblings. "Los Angeles approach. Flight 447 requests priority handling for law enforcement coordination upon landing," Sarah transmitted. "We have 7 suspects in custody who may provide intelligence about ongoing threats." "Roger, Flight 447. FBI and counterterrorism units are standing by. Runway 24 is cleared for your exclusive use. Emergency vehicles are in position." As they descended through 20,000 feet, Sarah could see military aircraft maintaining a protective perimeter around Flight 447. 2 F-16 fighter jets flanked their aircraft at a respectful distance, ready to intercept any remaining threats in the area. The hijacker leader was now fully conscious and staring at Sarah with hatred and confusion. He clearly couldn't understand how an ordinary airline pilot had defeated his carefully trained team so decisively. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor while listening to his Arabic complaints about operational security failures. "How long until we land?" asked one of the passengers over the intercom. "Approximately 20 minutes, Sarah replied. "Please remain calm and follow all instructions from the flight attendants. We will be met by law enforcement officers who will need to interview passengers about what happened during the flight." She didn't mention that federal agents would be particularly interested in passengers who had helped overpower the hijackers. Those individuals had shown courage under extreme pressure and might be valuable witnesses in the investigation of the broader terrorist network. The aircraft's radio crackled with an update from air traffic control. "Flight 447, be advised that 2 other aircraft have been identified as potential threats. Military assets are responding. Your intelligence has been instrumental in preventing additional attacks." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction knowing that her quick thinking had helped protect innocent lives beyond her own aircraft. However, she also realized that the investigation into this terrorist operation would be extensive and could potentially expose her military background. As they approached Los Angeles International Airport, Sarah could see the massive security presence assembled on the ground. Police vehicles, FBI command units, and military personnel surrounded the designated runway. News helicopters circled at a distance, though they were being kept well away from the landing area. "David, I need you to handle the landing checklist while I coordinate with approach control," Sarah said. "This is going to be a very controlled arrival." The first officer nodded and began running through pre-landing procedures while Sarah communicated with controllers about the precise landing protocol. The aircraft would be guided to a remote area of the airport where passengers could be safely evacuated and the hijackers transferred to federal custody. Flight 447. After landing, you will be directed to Taxiway Echo where you will shut down engines and await law enforcement boarding. Do not attempt to taxi to the terminal area. Understood, Sarah replied. We'll comply with all ground control instructions. The hijacker leader had been listening to these radio transmissions and seemed to realize that his mission had failed completely. He began speaking urgently in Arabic to his unconscious companions, apparently trying to wake them so they could attempt suicide rather than face interrogation. Sarah pretended not to understand while memorizing every word for later debriefing with intelligence officials. The terrorist was revealing details about training camps, operational procedures, and contacts within the United States that could be invaluable for preventing future attacks. Beginning final approach, Sarah announced to the passengers. Everyone, please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened and prepare for landing. The descent was smooth despite the extraordinary circumstances. Sarah's years of experience flying in combat zones had prepared her for high-stress landings, and she brought the Boeing 777 down with textbook precision. As the aircraft touched down on runway 24R, Sarah could see hundreds of law enforcement personnel positioned around the landing area. Sharpshooters were visible on nearby buildings, and armored vehicles were standing by in case the situation deteriorated. Flight 447 is safely on the ground. She transmitted to air traffic control. Beginning taxi to the designated secure area. The aircraft rolled slowly toward the remote taxiway while passengers applauded, and several people began crying with relief. They had survived a terrorist attack that could have killed thousands of people in Los Angeles, and they knew their nightmare was finally ending. However, Sarah realized that her own challenges were just beginning. Federal investigators would want to know exactly how an airline pilot had been able to defeat 7 trained terrorists so efficiently. Her military background would inevitably be discovered, and she would need to balance operational security requirements with the demands of a criminal investigation. As Flight 447 came to a stop in the secure area, Sarah shut down the engines and prepared to face questions that would test her ability to protect classified information while ensuring that justice was served. The hijackers had chosen the wrong aircraft and definitely the wrong pilot, but the full consequences of their mistake were yet to be revealed. The aircraft sat motionless on the isolated taxiway as dozens of federal agents surrounded Flight 447. Sarah watched through her cockpit window as FBI tactical teams took positions while bomb-sniffing dogs searched the exterior of the aircraft for explosive devices. The operation was being conducted with military precision, suggesting that her intelligence about coordinated attacks had triggered the highest levels of government response. Captain Mitchell, came a voice over the radio. This is FBI Special Agent Collins. We're going to board the aircraft now to secure the suspects. Please remain in the cockpit with your first officer until we give you clearance to move. Understood, Sarah replied. She turned to David, who was staring in amazement at the security forces assembling around their aircraft. This is going to take a while. Try to stay calm and answer any questions honestly. The first officer nodded, though Sarah could see he was still processing what had happened during the flight. His hands shook slightly as he completed the engine shutdown checklist, and she knew he would need counseling to deal with the trauma of the hijacking. Within minutes, heavily armed agents entered the aircraft through multiple doors simultaneously. Sarah could hear shouting and movement as they secured each hijacker and began evacuating passengers in small groups. The operation was being filmed for intelligence analysis, and every detail would be scrutinized to understand how the terrorist plot had been executed and defeated. Special Agent Collins entered the cockpit with 2 other agents, all wearing tactical gear and carrying assault rifles. His demeanor was professional but intense as he surveyed the restrained hijackers and damage to the flight deck. Captain Mitchell, I'm Agent Collins with the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force. First, I want to thank you for your actions in preventing what could have been a catastrophic attack. However, I need to ask you some detailed questions about what happened here. Sarah nodded calmly. Of course, I'll provide whatever information you need. Collins studied her face carefully, noting her composed demeanor and professional bearing. Most civilian pilots would be showing signs of severe stress after such an ordeal, but Sarah appeared remarkably controlled for someone who had just fought off multiple armed terrorists. Can you walk me through exactly how you were able to subdue 3 armed men in this confined space? Collins asked. Sarah had prepared for this question during the approach to Los Angeles. She needed to provide enough detail to satisfy investigators while protecting her classified military background. I have some martial arts training from college and took self-defense classes before joining the airline. When the leader moved close to check my instruments, I saw an opportunity and acted instinctively. The explanation was plausible, but incomplete. Collins was clearly an experienced investigator who recognized evasive answers when he heard them. He made notes while continuing his questioning. The other passengers reported that you gave very specific tactical instructions over the public address system. You directed them to identify and restrain remaining hijackers with unusual precision for a civilian pilot. I was trying to coordinate passenger response to neutralize the remaining threats, Sarah replied carefully. In emergency situations, clear leadership can prevent panic and save lives. Agent Collins exchanged glances with his colleagues, who were photographing the crime scene and collecting evidence from the restrained terrorists. One of them whispered something in Collins' ear that made him study Sarah even more intently. Captain, we've run a preliminary background check, and there are some gaps in your employment history before joining the airline. Would you like to clarify those periods for our investigation? Sarah realized they had already discovered her military service, at least partially. The FBI had access to personnel databases that would show her Navy enlistment, though the classified details of her SEAL operations might not be immediately visible. I served in the Navy for 8 years before transitioning to civilian aviation, Sarah admitted. My military experience included flight training and some specialized duties that I'm not permitted to discuss in detail. This revelation transformed the atmosphere in the cockpit. Agent Collins straightened in his seat as he realized he was interviewing a military veteran with combat experience, which would explain her exceptional performance against the hijackers. What type of specialized duties? Collins pressed. I'm bound by security classifications that prevent me from discussing specifics, Sarah replied firmly. However, I can provide you with contact information for my former commanding officers who might be authorized to share relevant details. Collins nodded and made extensive notes. The FBI would need to coordinate with military intelligence agencies to understand the full scope of Sarah's background, but that process could take time that might be crucial for preventing additional terrorist attacks. Let's focus on the intelligence you gathered during the hijacking, Collins said, shifting his approach. You mentioned coordinated communications suggesting other aircraft were involved. Sarah provided a detailed account of the Arabic conversations she had overheard, translating the content accurately while being careful not to reveal the extent of her language training. She described the references to synchronized timing, target locations, and coordination with terrorist cells on the ground. This intelligence has already been invaluable, Collins admitted. We've identified and intercepted 2 other hijacked aircraft based on your reports. Military assets are currently securing those flights, and we believe your actions may have prevented thousands of casualties. The magnitude of what had been prevented began to sink in. Sarah realized that Flight 447 had been part of a massive terrorist operation designed to rival or exceed the September 11th attacks. The hijackers had planned to crash multiple aircraft into major population centers during morning rush hour when casualties would be maximized. Are the other aircraft secure? Sarah asked. I can't provide operational details, but I can tell you that your quick thinking and accurate intelligence reporting have been crucial to our response, Collins replied. One of the other agents approached with a tablet computer showing surveillance footage from the aircraft's internal security cameras. Sarah could see herself fighting the hijackers from multiple angles, and her movements clearly demonstrated advanced combat training far beyond civilian self-defense classes. Captain, this footage shows tactical proficiency that suggests extensive military combat training, the agent observed. We need to understand your background to properly assess the intelligence value of what you observed. Sarah made a decision that she knew would complicate her life, but was necessary for national security. Agent Collins, I think you need to contact Captain James Rodriguez at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. He can provide appropriate information about my background while maintaining necessary security protocols. The mention of Naval Special Warfare Command caused all three agents to stop what they were doing and stare at Sarah. They clearly understood the significance of that organization and its connection to the Navy SEALs, America's most elite special operations forces. You're telling us you were a Navy SEAL? Collins asked quietly. I'm telling you that Captain Rodriguez can provide appropriate information about my service record, Sarah replied carefully. The implications were staggering. A former Navy SEAL pilot flying commercial aircraft had successfully defeated a major terrorist operation through a combination of combat skills, intelligence gathering, and tactical decision-making. The hijackers had chosen their target with devastating incompetence. Collins stepped outside the cockpit to make urgent phone calls to federal headquarters and military liaisons. Sarah could hear him speaking in hushed tones about operational security and the need for immediate military consultation. Meanwhile, the passenger evacuation continued as each traveler was interviewed by federal agents and checked for connections to the terrorist network. The 7 captured hijackers were being transferred to high-security detention facilities where they would face intensive interrogation about their organization and planned attacks. David sat quietly beside Sarah, occasionally glancing at her with new understanding. He was beginning to comprehend that his colleague was far more than an ordinary airline pilot, though the full extent of her background remained classified. Sarah, David said softly, I want to thank you for saving our lives. I know there's a lot you can't tell me about who you really are, but I'm grateful you were in that pilot's seat today. We're all just lucky the hijackers made poor choices about their target, Sarah replied modestly. Agent Collins returned to the cockpit with a secure satellite phone, which he handed to Sarah. Captain Rodriguez is standing by for a classified briefing. He's been authorized to coordinate with our investigation while protecting operational security. Sarah took the phone and spoke briefly with her former commanding officer, providing him with an overview of the situation and the intelligence she had gathered. Rodriguez would handle the delicate balance between supporting the FBI investigation and protecting classified information about SEAL operations. As the sun set over Los Angeles International Airport, Sarah realized that her quiet civilian career was about to become much more complicated. The media would eventually learn about the heroic actions of Flight 447's crew, and her military background would likely become public knowledge despite security concerns. However, she also knew that her actions had prevented a catastrophic terrorist attack that could have killed thousands of innocent Americans. The hijackers had planned their operation carefully, but they had fatally underestimated their target. Their mistake had not only saved Flight 447 but had also provided intelligence that enabled authorities to stop the broader plot. 3 weeks after the hijacking of Flight 447, Sarah Mitchell sat in a secure conference room at FBI headquarters in Los Angeles, participating in what would be her final debriefing session. The investigation had revealed the full scope of the terrorist plot, and her actions had been credited with preventing one of the most devastating attacks in American history. Agent Collins placed a thick file on the table between them, its contents representing weeks of intensive investigation into the terrorist network that had targeted multiple aircraft. Captain Mitchell, thanks to your intelligence gathering and tactical response, we've been able to dismantle an entire terrorist cell and prevent coordinated attacks that could have killed over 10,000 people. The numbers were staggering. 7 aircraft had been targeted for simultaneous hijackings, with plans to crash them into major landmarks and population centers across the West Coast during morning rush hour. Only Flight 447 and 2 other aircraft had actually been compromised, and all 3 had been successfully recovered thanks to the early warning Sarah had provided. What happened to the other flights? Sarah asked. The intelligence you provided allowed us to identify and board the other compromised aircraft while they were still on approach to their targets, Collins explained. Military assets were able to intervene before the hijackers could complete their missions. Your quick thinking literally saved thousands of lives. Sarah nodded quietly, still processing the magnitude of what had been prevented. The investigation had revealed that the terrorist organization had been planning this operation for over 2 years, carefully placing operatives in positions to board specific flights and training them for coordinated attacks. The 7 hijackers from your flight have provided extensive intelligence under interrogation, Collins continued. They've identified training camps, financial networks, and other terrorist cells operating in the United States. This single operation has generated enough intelligence to keep us busy for years. The door to the conference room opened, and Captain James Rodriguez entered wearing his Navy dress uniform. Sarah's former commanding officer had been coordinating with federal agencies throughout the investigation, balancing national security requirements with the need to support the terrorism prosecution. Sarah, it's good to see you, Rodriguez said, taking a seat across from her. I've been authorized to brief you on some developments related to your situation. Sarah had been wondering about the long-term consequences of her exposure during the hijacking incident. Her military background was now known to federal investigators, and she suspected that her quiet civilian career was about to change dramatically. The Navy Department has been reviewing your actions during the Flight 447 incident, Rodriguez continued. Your performance under extreme pressure reflected exceptionally well on your SEAL training and the special operations community as a whole. Agent Collins leaned forward with interest. The FBI had been impressed by Sarah's capabilities, but they were still learning about the extent of her military background. Much of her SEAL service record remained classified above their clearance level. Captain Rodriguez, we've been hoping to better understand Captain Mitchell's tactical background for our final report, Collins said. Her performance during the hijacking was extraordinary, but we need more context to properly document what happened. Rodriguez considered his response carefully. Agent Collins, what I can tell you is that Captain Mitchell graduated from one of the most demanding military training programs in the world. She served with distinction in multiple combat zones and received several decorations for heroism under fire. The skills she demonstrated on Flight 447 represent exactly the kind of capabilities we develop in our special operations personnel. This was the first time anyone had provided specific details about Sarah's military achievements, and Collins made extensive notes for his final report. The FBI investigation had concluded that her actions were not only heroic but also professionally executed with a level of tactical sophistication that suggested extensive combat experience. There's another matter we need to discuss, Rodriguez continued, his tone becoming more serious. The exposure of your background during this incident has created some security concerns for ongoing operations. However, it's also opened up new opportunities for service. Sarah had been expecting this conversation. Her civilian cover had been compromised, and she knew that would affect her options for future assignments. The question was whether the Navy wanted her to return to active duty or continue in her civilian role with modified responsibilities. The Department of Homeland Security has requested your assistance with a new aviation security initiative, Rodriguez explained. They want experienced military personnel working within the commercial aviation system to provide early warning and rapid response capabilities for future threats. This was an intriguing possibility. Sarah would be able to continue flying commercial aircraft while also serving as a covert security asset for federal agencies. Her demonstrated ability to gather intelligence and respond to threats made her an ideal candidate for such a program. What would that involve? Sarah asked. Agent Collins answered first. We're developing a classified program that places qualified personnel in strategic positions throughout the transportation system. Your airlines would know you have security responsibilities, but passengers and most employees would be unaware of your additional role. It would be a joint assignment between the Navy and DHS, Rodriguez added. You'd maintain your civilian pilot position while also serving as a federal air marshal with special operations capabilities. Think of it as extending your SEAL mission into the commercial aviation environment. Sarah considered the proposal carefully. It would allow her to continue the career she had built while also serving her country in a new capacity. The skills she had developed during 8 years of military service would be put to use protecting innocent travelers from terrorist threats. There's one more thing, Collins said, producing another document from his file. The media attention from this incident has been significant. Your airline has received thousands of letters from passengers expressing gratitude for your actions. However, we've been able to keep most details about your military background classified. Sarah had been avoiding news coverage of the hijacking, but she knew it had generated international attention. The story of passengers and crew working together to defeat terrorists had captured public imagination, though security agencies had carefully controlled which details were revealed. The president wants to recognize your actions with a civilian decoration, Rodriguez announced. However, the ceremony would necessarily involve some public exposure that could affect your future covert assignments. This presented a difficult choice. Sarah appreciated the recognition, but she valued her ability to serve without public attention more than medals or ceremonies. Her most effective contributions to national security had always been made in the shadows. "I'd prefer to decline any public recognition," Sarah said after considering the options. "If I'm going to be effective in this new role, I need to maintain as low a profile as possible." Both Collins and Rodriguez nodded approvingly. They understood that truly effective covert operatives avoided publicity and preferred to let their results speak for themselves. "That's what we expected you to say," Rodriguez replied. "However, there will be a private recognition ceremony for the military personnel who have contributed to counterterrorism operations this year. Your actions will be acknowledged within the special operations community, even if the public never learns the full details." Sarah felt satisfied with this compromise. Recognition from her peers in the military was more meaningful to her than media attention or civilian honors. The SEAL community understood the importance of serving without glory or public acclaim. "What about David and the other crew members?" Sarah asked, thinking about her first officer who had supported her during the crisis. "First Officer Chun has been offered a position with our aviation security program as well," Collins replied. His performance during the emergency showed excellent judgment under pressure. The other crew members are receiving counseling and support, and several passengers have asked about ways to thank the flight crew personally. As the debriefing session concluded, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 3 weeks. She had gone from being an anonymous airline pilot to being a key figure in one of the most significant counterterrorism operations in recent years. The hijackers who had targeted Flight 447 had made a catastrophic error in judgment. They had expected to encounter an ordinary commercial pilot who would be too frightened to resist their demands. Instead, they had chosen an aircraft commanded by one of America's most highly trained special operations veterans. Their mistake had not only cost them their mission but had also provided intelligence that dismantled their entire terrorist network. Sarah's actions had demonstrated that even in civilian roles, military veterans continued to serve their country and protect innocent lives. Walking out of FBI headquarters into the bright California sunshine, Sarah felt ready to begin this new chapter of her career. She would return to flying commercial aircraft, but now with the additional responsibility of serving as a covert guardian for the millions of passengers who traveled safely through American skies every day. The hijackers had learned too late that they had chosen the wrong aircraft and definitely the wrong pilot. Their failure had become America's victory, and Sarah Mitchell had proven that heroism could emerge from the most unexpected places when trained professionals were ready to act in defense of innocent lives. The sky was clear as Sarah drove back to Los Angeles International Airport to prepare for her next flight, knowing that her passengers would never realize they were being protected by someone who had already proven capable of defeating any threat that dared to challenge the safety of American aviation.